All right, in this video, we're going to talk about form controls. Now, the first thing you need to know about form controls is that by default, it will not be on your computer. When you install Excel, it does not automatically put this tab on there. You can see right here where I've got my mouse that I have Developer. To have that available to you, you will need to click on File. You will go to Options. You will go to Customize the ribbon. And under Customize the ribbon, you will see a spot for Developer. Make sure it's checked. Click OK. And that will make this tab called Developer available to you. Now, the thing that we're going to be using is under Insert. Insert Controls, you will see you have these little controls available to you. The one that we're going to start off with is the checkbox. All right, so this checkbox control is what we're going to be using, and we're going to put it on this particular chart so that you can see how to use this checkbox to turn this particular sales trend line here on and off. All right, so the first thing I've got to do is explain to you what's going on, because I think this is probably the hardest ones to understand just because you've probably never done anything like it before. I'm going to show you the data that is connected to this chart. This is the data. Again, this is 2009-10 sales data. You could create a pivot table that has the data. Would be your raw data. And then from there, you would have to create a if statement. Now, the if statement is an important link to this toggle right here that's going to allow this if statement to control whether there's data available or not. So if you look here, this says equal if A12, which is here, A12 is equal to true, and true's in there right now. Then you put in the data down here in C12. If it's not true, then you put in what's called it's a function called the NA function. Okay, and this NA function just means there's no value that is available. All right, that is what makes this data change back and forth. So that gives it that kind of disappearing effect. So let's create the chart so you can see what I'm talking about work. I'm going to select the data that I want to make the chart from. Go to Insert, and I'm going to use a plain column chart. All right, once I have the column chart created, you'll see here that if I have true, I see all the data for 2009 and 10. If I change it to false, the data disappears because that's where this if statement comes in. If it's true, you show the data for 2009. If it's false, you use the function called the NA, meaning there's no value available, which is why it disappears. All right, so true shows the data. Now, on the other one you saw, this was a really neat line that kind of disappeared. To do that, it's just like we've done before. So I can either click on the blue or go down here and click. Either way, doesn't matter. I'm doing a right click, formatting the data series here. Okay, when I right click on there, if I needed a secondary axis, I could. And this particular one, I don't need that because as you can see, these values are the same, so that the secondary axis is not really necessary in this case. So the only thing I'm going to have to do is I'm just going to have to change the chart type, and I'm going to change 2009 to a line marker. All right, so line with markers now, just like the one you saw on the other page. And now, when I'm typing in false, it'll disappear from the line. Now, in here, one thing that I wanted to show you, I'm going to put it back to true, okay, and then the line's back. One thing that I'm going to show you is you've seen how this is linked, the if statement, to this toggle. What you now need to see is how to link the checkbox to this particular data, because what the checkbox is going to do for us is instead of typing it like I just did a minute ago, you're going to use a checkbox to do it for you. So I'm going to go up here to Developer and click. I'm doing Insert, and I'm going to the checkbox. I'm going to click and I'll just put it right here on the chart, but it doesn't really matter where it's at. I can change the name of this checkbox. I'm going to call it 2009 sales. Okay, and then I'm going to take and do a right click on top of it, and I'm going to format this control. Now, when you format it, that's the key. This is what's going to link this checkbox to this toggle. Otherwise, the checkbox won't work. So I click here, and I can click on A12, and I can click OK. Now I have it all connected. So I can check on this box, right? I can check it. There comes the line for 2009, and you'll see here it's true. Uncheck it, turns to false automatically, and it's gone. So what this checkbox is doing for me is typing this in for me, basically. Because the first time I showed you, I typed it in on the keyboard. Now I'm actually using the checkbox to do it for me. Okay, now one thing I'm going to caution you about, when you move this onto your dashboard, just like this one's on a different page right here, okay, what you're going to have to do is make sure you reconnect this link, because when you move it, it only put in A12. When you have it on a different page, you have to have the worksheet name with it, or else it doesn't know what to do. So this looks all nice and pretty. All this is behind there is just a box that's been colored. That's it. So, I mean, I could do something, if I wanted to pretty it up, I could go over here to actually add a shape. Okay, so I could come over here to shapes, add a box, and I could put a pretty box on here and resize it. And we'll say about that. And then take this chart, and I'm going to move it onto this paste. Okay, I'm going to resize it a little bit here and just kind of move it around so that it looks all nice and pretty. Actually, let me get this a little closer so we can see better. All right, and then I'm going to move my checkbox. Okay, so again, it's a matter of just getting hold of it. And we'll move it, and I'll just put it right up here. Oh, I have to move it. Okay, drop down. I'll move it right up here, kind of like the one that we saw. All right, and so now I have it kind of all set up. Now, again, in here, you want to make sure that you relink it, because it does need, in front of here, it doesn't have the worksheet name. Okay, so I'm going to open this up, go back to my model. You'll see it by default then, it puts that in there, and now I can click on A12. Okay, I kind of clicked into the middle of it here. So to make sure I got a good, clean name in there, I'm going to re-put that in there. Hold on one second. All right, so we're going to put the name. Then the A12 goes on the end. That gives me the name of the worksheet and the cell. I click OK. It's been relinked. And now when I click on it, presto, it works. Okay, so that's how you can do a checkbox using a form control. Now, on these other ones, I'm just going to explain a couple of them to you just so you have the idea of it. This one is an option. Once you've learned how to do the checkbox, they all are kind of easy because you understand how they work. An option does the same type of thing, but instead of using true and false, it uses numbers, 1, 2, 3. So to create this one, I have, again, an if statement, but instead of having true or false, I have if it equals a 1, put in the sales. If it equals a 2, put in the sales. Or else, put in the sales of the third one. And then I have to have 3 option buttons. So I'll just show you what I mean by that by clicking on Insert. I find my option button, click. That's the first one. It knows what number by the order that you create them. This is 1. I would create another one for 2, another one for 3. Okay, so if I added, I'll show you what I mean if I add another one. So that would be option 2. Okay, now, once I have the number of buttons I want, I just do the form control thing again. And again, I have to link it to that trigger. Click OK, and I've created a option button that's linked to the data. Okay, so you see how that works? Okay, so again, you can link them to the data in the same way that we did the checkbox. It's just a matter of how many options that you would have available to you and using numbers instead of true and false. And then the next one I want to show you is a list box. So I'm going to click over and here's the list box. This is actually hold on a second there. This is actually 3 different charts. You'll see it's just been set up on here. This is the form control. It works by clicking on the list. The only difference with this one is that you have 2 things that you have to connect. So, as you can see on this one, these are the 3 charts that would be moved over to the dashboard and set up like the one you just saw here. Okay, and then this is like we had a trigger and we had the spot, the true-false spot we had to connect to. This is what you're connecting to. That would be here, this list, and this particular list output. So how do you do that? Again, you go to Developer, Insert. This time we're doing a list box. Okay, so we put a list box on here. You'll see that this is where the list is going to go. We have to do a form control, but instead of just linking one thing, which like we did before, that would be to this list output, we also have to put the input range, which is this list right here. All right, and that allows us to select one of these. It corresponds to the number, and then that number is actually what it selects from this choose statement that's in here. So I click OK. This is now connected there. All right, as you can see, it has a 0 in there, which is actually not one of the numbers that we wanted to put in there. But if we go ahead and let's come off of here, we can now click, and you can see that our charts move because we've connected. Now, in here, this is an example of a choose function. So I know I gave you choices on what you use, but this choose function is one that's also available, and this is an example of how it could be useful to use one of those instead of an if statement necessarily. All right, so that's some examples of the form controls. The one other thing that I will show you that your book talks about is under Developer. Okay, well, let me come out of here. All right, under Developer, you go to Insert, and there's a button control. If I click on button here, I can connect a button to a macro. So, for instance, if I wanted to do a macro that would filter for the top salespeople, okay, or a macro that would, like I said before, would copy the newest prices onto a worksheet so that I could calculate the revenue. I could create the macro, okay, and here I could create it here with the button, or I could actually go ahead and have it created, and then I could connect the button to it afterwards. So let's just say that I've already got the macro created. I put this button on here. I'm just going to go ahead and say, okay, I now have this button, and I could say, call this button, not button 2, that's not very informative. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so that we can kind of click into it a little easier. And I'm going to call this button the new retail. Oops, to spell it right there, retail button. All right, I'm going to take off the 2. All right, now I have the button, I have it named. I can go on it and I can assign a macro to it. So if I already have my macro created to say copy the new retail data from the raw data worksheet onto the spreadsheet where it's going to calculate the revenue for me, I could just select it, click OK, and then I can use that button to go and perform that task for me, so I wouldn't have to copy and paste it all the time. And I could just put that button with that particular pivot table where I was calculating the revenue. Another thing that it's used a lot for is just to navigate. So I could create a macro. Okay, so let's go ahead, we'll do that one together. Suppose I just want to create a macro, and I'm going to actually go under Developer and record a macro. Okay, we'll call this nav, and we're going to record a macro that would go to a different worksheet. So let's say that I want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and call it nav. I'm going to click OK. All right, now I'm going to navigate to, let's see here. I'm going to navigate over to the checkbox. All right, and now I'm going to stop the macro from recording. And now I'm going to go back to the one that we were just at, where I have the button. I can now assign that macro, nav, click OK. And now when I use this, it takes me right to that page. So that's an example of a button with navigation. So, I mean, any macro you make, you could make a button that would correspond to it that way. A good example of what to use at a macro could be things, again, like navigation is a simple one, to more advanced things like copying over data that you copy all the time, like I suggested with revenue, to creating one for like a top 10 filter. Okay, so it's a more advanced than maybe with Slicer. Okay, so those are some examples of what you could do.